Thanks everyone for joining this morning. So to our speaker and to our audience, good morning and welcome to iSelect's Deep Dive webinar series. My name is David Yoakum. I'm an associate here on the iSelect Fund Ventures team. I'm excited to walk you through today's presentation and findings. For those of you who are new to these webinars, iSelect is an early stage venture capital firm in St. Louis, Missouri, focused primarily on early stage companies in healthcare and agriculture. At iSelect, we are privileged to live at the forefront of innovation, seeing emerging problems, solutions, and macro trends at their beginning before they make their way into popular culture. We use these deep dive presentations not only as a way for us to better engage with and understand new science and technology, but also to engage with the experts and entrepreneurs who are driving change and innovation in their respective fields. Now, a number of macro trends that we follow in the food industry are rooted in changes that consumers want to see in the food and in the food system. As consumer preferences for food have shifted and accelerated significantly over the past 5 to 10 years, and even significantly in the last year due to COVID-19, today we look to better understand how consumer packaged goods or CPG companies respond to these trends to either create new products, modify existing ones, purchase new businesses, or work with startups. As consumers shift towards foods that are healthier and more functional, more sustainable, plant-based, and traceable, to name a few areas of growth. And as new brands continue to inundate these niches, today we look into how large CPG companies are responding to these trends to stay on top and stay relevant. A few process comments before we begin. We are not soliciting investment or giving investment advice in any way whatsoever. This presentation is general industry research based on publicly available information. We have invited you to this because you're technologists, thought leaders, entrepreneurs, industry experts, early adopter customers, or sophisticated investors that are part of the iSelect network. We value your thoughts, questions, comments, and insights into this topic and would greatly appreciate it if you actively engage during the presentation. Thank you in advance for your attendance and active participation. We ask that you put yourself on mute for the time being. However, we hope for this to be an engaging, interactive presentation. So if you have questions or comments, please feel free to unmute yourself to ask a question or provide commentary. We will typically address questions from the audience at the end of the presentation as time allows. This presentation is being recorded and will be available for replay. And so with that, I am pleased to bring you this week's deep dive on CPGs and shifting consumer preferences. Just to give a sense of what we're going to cover today, we have 2 main sections beyond the opener and the closer. And what we're really going to talk about are why consumer preferences and why the number of brands that have entered the market in food have increased so much in the last 5 to 10 years. We're going to talk about 3 key trends that are emerging in terms of shifting consumer preferences, just to give some context to what these companies are responding to in terms of new products and new product innovation. And then we're going to have some really interesting conversations with our speakers, who I'm going to have just give a brief introduction here in a moment. And then finally, we'll wrap things up with our thesis and an opportunity for questions from our speakers and for myself as well, if you have any questions for me. So with that, I'd love to just start off with a couple of brief introductions from the speakers that we have on today. If we could start with Ed, then go with Adam, Jim, Rich, and Michelle, that'd be fantastic.
Sure. So Ed Rogers, CEO of Bonumose, formed the company 5 years ago with our Chief Scientific Officer, Dr. Dan Wichelecki, and I'm very pleased to be working on some sugar optimization efforts with our good partners, ASR and Hershey's, and glad to be here today.
Thanks, Ed.
Great. Adam Kane here with the Hershey Company. I've been with the company for almost a decade in the M&A and corporate development department. And recently we set up the C7 Ventures arm to make investments in disruptive technologies. And that led us to Ed and Bonumose. So happy to be here today.
Thanks, Adam.
Good morning, everyone. Jim Kappas with ASR. I've spent my career beginning with Pfizer and then Cargill in the novel ingredient space. Worked in the health and nutrition group at Cargill and came to ASR 3 years ago to manage their specialty group, which includes our pipeline of new technology sweeteners.
Excellent. Thanks, Jim.
Hi, good morning, Richard Dyer. I've been with ASR for about 10 years now, and I lead the innovation section of ASR, working with internal and external innovation, and very happy to say that Ed Rogers, we've been working with Bonumose for almost 3 years now, in terms of identifying technologies and bringing technologies in that would help service our customers and consumers.
Excellent. Thanks, Rich.
And hi, I'm Michelle Bleckler. I'm the CPG and retail panelist. I spent 21 years at the Hershey company, although it was before Adam arrived at the Hershey company. I also spent 8 years at Walmart and at Academy Sports. Currently, I serve on the BJ's Wholesale Club board, and I spent the past 2 years also serving on the Benson Hill board.
Excellent. Thanks, Michelle. Well, really excited to have everybody on the call today and a bunch of really unique perspectives here that I think we're going to shed some really interesting insights on the inner workings of some of these companies and how they respond to some of these trends that we're going to talk about here over the next few minutes. I'll spend the next 10 minutes or so, maybe 15 if we end up running long, just talking about some of these key trends. And then we're going to get into some really interesting conversations with these speakers to learn more about what they're working on and get a better understanding of what we can come to expect from the future of food. So this next section is focused on essentially what is happening in terms of new brands emerging and new consumer trends that are emerging. And we'll dive into 3 of those consumer trends, principally plant-based foods, sustainable foods, and better for you functional or food as health-oriented food trends. So a number of big shifts have occurred over the last 5 to 10 years across a number of facets of the food system and in new food products. But to boil it down, we fundamentally have a more educated consumer and an influx of new brands and significantly increased personalization. And the chart on the left, though it shows data from 2017, gives a sense of what has happened over the last 5 years. New brands have dominated across CPG. Large CPGs have lost market share to smaller brands consecutively over the last 5 years. And so you might wonder, why is that? Well, on the market side, the barriers to entry are a lot lower than they used to be. It's both easier for emerging brands to target and get in front of target customers, as well as for consumers to find out more about the brands and products they're interested in. And neither are confined by just the supermarket space to make their buying and marketing decisions. And while convenience and access are an important aspect, it additionally lines up with some major consumer trends that have been developing over the past 2 decades, a few of which we'll discuss here shortly. But fundamentally, consumers, particularly millennials, are looking to connect with their products and buy in a different way than consumers have previously, where they can vote for what matters the most with their dollar. And in that way, this has embodied some of the trends that have shaped the world and will continue to shape the world. And I fundamentally put these trends into 3 buckets that I put in that first slide there, which was better for me, better for you, and better for the planet. And a lot of these trends end up revolving around one of these segments is people thinking about how can they improve themselves, how can they improve the world around them, or how can they improve the planet itself, or have a reduced impact through the food and buying decisions that they make. So in the context of these 3 trends, I want to provide a little bit of fodder for our conversations with our speakers by covering first off on plant-based foods, then functional and better for you foods, and then finally sustainable and environmentally friendly foods. And then I would kindly ask our speakers if you have thoughts or any suggestions while we're moving through some of these slides, please feel free to jump in. Dedicated Q&A and a speaker portion later on, but if you have thoughts, please don't hesitate. So starting off with plant-based foods. The plant-based foods trend has really been referred to more of as a movement. And this shift towards plant-based foods, particularly in lieu of animal products, stems from a few key trends that affect consumers in different ways. And the way in which plant-based foods embody what a lot of consumers care about helps explain why it has been such an explosive movement. When you think about it, some of these key drivers which are shown on the left, the plant-based foods as a message encompasses animal welfare, environmental benefits such as reduced carbon emissions, reduced land use, reduced water use, improved human health and nutrition. And a lot of this has been even accelerated by COVID-19. And there's been a lot of really interesting data that's been published in the last year around how much of a pull plant-based meats in particular in the plant-based food category have just exploded in terms of consumer acceptance and consumer adoption. Whether or not that continues to hold at the same rate remains to be seen, but nonetheless, we've seen a pretty extensive amount of growth in this category. just to throw some stats out there, consumer demand and sales of plant-based products, and plant-based in this instance, not necessarily referring to vegetables, which are obviously plant-based. We're talking about products that are historically have had animal-based ingredients and now are using plant-based ingredients for the most part. Consumer demand and sales of these products is expected to increase 20% year over year through 2024, though some estimates are more bullish depending on what publication you're reading. According to the Good Food Institute, plant-based foods grew by 27% between 2019 and 2020, and likely by a similar margin in 2020 into 2021. According to ADM, 56% of consumers are more likely to eat plant-based foods and beverages, and plant-based product sales grew more than 2.5 times faster than total food sales in 2018 and 2020. Now, in this movement toward plant-based, which for some is a commitment to move away from meat and animal products entirely, but for many others is a part of the flexitarian movement to simply eat less meat, a number of key players have locked into this opportunity. So major CPG, PepsiCo partnered up with Beyond Meat this year, the plant-based meat company, one of the main plant-based meat companies. I don't want to throw Impossible Foods under the bus. Now, whether or not these products will end up hitting the health and nutrition piece remains to be seen, but without a doubt will be built on the messaging that essentially plants are lower impact on our bodies and on the planet. Other major players include newer companies like Impossible Foods, a direct competitor to Beyond Meat, but also groups like Morningstar and Diet, who've been around for quite some time and have been mostly serving the vegan, vegetarian, and lactose intolerant populations for decades, but are now getting to ride this increased wave of interest. The demand for plant-based proteins to formulate these food products has gone up as well, which has increased opportunities for companies like Benson Hill, who are working on improving pea protein and soy protein yield and quality, and companies like Nutriati that are developing chickpea-based protein formulators, companies that are essentially helping power this demand for plant-based protein products, where there either may not be strong enough supply or simply a demand for increased quality. We'll talk about challenges of formulation a little bit later on, but one of the issues working with plant-based proteins is that sometimes they have aftertaste or textural components that are really different from what we come to expect from animal-based products. And that's been one of the biggest challenges, that even if you bite into a Beyond Meat burger, and I myself have been extremely impressed by the flavor profile and texture that these companies have achieved so far. But fundamentally, anytime you're looking at replacing animal-based ingredients with plant-based ingredients, there are fundamental challenges that we'll come to face.
David, I think that's a great point as you transition. There's a lot on the slide that I think we all kind of live every day, but the customer perspective, the consumer acceptance, that taste and texture that you mentioned, I think that is absolutely something that over time working in CPG and retails, the customer is not willing to sacrifice taste, texture, and to some extent price. So I think those are, additional things to consider, and I'm glad to hear you incorporate them into the discussion. I know at Benson Hill, creating ingredients that perform better, are more nutritious, taste better, and provide a good texture for consumer acceptance is very, very important.
Yeah, I think that's a really excellent point, Michelle. And it's interesting in the context of thinking of these original plant-based brands like a Morningstar or a Diet that have been around for a long time, and then haven't really been serving the customer that's accustomed to having a taste for meat and meat products. And so bridging that gap certainly requires us to think about doing things a little bit differently. Another key trend that I want to talk a little bit about is this sort of functional and better for you movement. The massive burden, so there's some key drivers I'll see here on the left that I would sort of put into this category. The first is the massive burden of diet-related disease in America and around the world, including type 2 diabetes, obesity, and heart disease, which certainly have had a role in consumers looking into food as a preventative measure for their health. But further, the onset of tools for people to better understand their personal health is still in the early days, yet really impactful. And people are looking to food as a general health source, but also as a health source for me specifically. And the tools that we have, whether or not it's simply fitness trackers all the way to personalized diet trackers, applications that help us get closer to what works better for you, are two major trends that are starting to converge, particularly as we come to understand the way in which food has impacted the cost of the healthcare system in the United States in particular. But finally, COVID-19 has absolutely had an impact on the ways in which people think about their food as a source of immunity for disease, which further ties back into thinking around food fundamentally as a source of health. So with that in mind, some stats here. 31% of consumers are purchasing items tailored to their health specifically. 50% are reporting preferences for food and bev with healthy ingredients. 60% of global consumers want food and bev that supports immune health, and 80% of Americans are now limiting or avoiding refined sugar in their diet. So there's a fundamental shift of consumers saying, I want more from my food. I want to connect with it at a macro level of nutrition. I want to connect with it at a personalized level of nutrition. And I want to remove or change the way I'm consuming specific ingredients that I may perceive to be better or worse for me. And some new companies have emerged to meet some of these trends. Brightseed, for example, is a startup that's working to map the world of phytonutrients and their relationship to human health and disease, which is really interesting from a context of not only how do we better understand nutrition, where there's still some really massive gaps in the way in which we truly understand how food impacts our health, but also an opportunity to say, I have this specific type of health condition or a digestive issue, and this is a company that's helping identify compounds that can have a really specific targeted impact. And there's an opportunity in CPGs and in major players to work with companies like a Brightseed. You know, for example, Brightseed has worked with Danone to help Danone identify opportunities to commercialize phytonutrients in their own products or in their own supply chain, whether that's identifying improved nutrients or whether that's identifying the best source of nutrients in their existing supply chain, and how to message and how to market some of those opportunities. And there's a number of other interesting key players listed here. And then the last trend I just want to talk a little bit about, and I will say it certainly has some overlap with the plant-based food movement, of course, because the plant-based movement is so large, it encompasses all these different trends, but the sustainability better for the planet trend is important to touch on. And really this word sustainability, which is a big word that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But some of these things that sustainability means to people are listed here on the left, including waste management, climate change, packaging, renewable energy, water management. And these are just a few of them. Environmental sustainability can encompass more and multiple of these different types of impacts. And the messaging on your packaging really does get down to this kind of specific level. I would encourage anybody who's on this call today, you can actually go to Ripple Foods' website and you can see in real time estimations of how much carbon, how much water, and how much plastic have been saved by consumers switching to their pea protein-based milks over traditional dairy. And it just gives a sense of the kind of granularity that consumers are coming to expect, and the way in which new CPGs or existing CPGs are building their story around these really specific types of impacts so that people can really feel like they're a part of that story. Now, the interesting thing here is that consumers are really vocal when it comes to saying that the environment matters to them. 33% of consumers choose to buy from brands they believe are doing environmental good. 50% of consumers buy sustainably sourced items in and of themselves, and 57% are willing to change their purchasing habits to reduce negative environmental impacts. But I will say if there's one area that I haven't seen compelling data on, and if there's any of our speakers have a different opinion, I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts, or if you've seen other data. But we've been looking at this for the last few years, and the one thing I haven't seen is that consumers are consistently willing to put their money where their mouths are when it comes to paying for environmental sustainability, which is unfortunate because it's really important, but needless to say, that's the case here. Now, this study that I reference here specifically, it says that consumers on average are willing to pay a 5% premium for more environmentally friendly products on average. Now, of course, there's greater segmentation where certain types of consumers are willing to pay a lot more. And certainly there are advocates who, simply will pay whatever it takes to get a more environmentally sustainable product. But on the whole, people care, but they don't want to pay that much more for how much they care. Michelle, I see you nodding here a lot. I don't know if you have a perspective here, if this is something that you've experienced as well.
I would agree with the statement, and I mentioned earlier that price is very important. So the work that we do in building these products that meet these key drivers as you have been laid out there, it's important to leverage our technology to collaborate and to deliver to the consumers something that they're looking for without a drastic premium price.
Yeah. Thanks, Michelle.
David, I think it's a differentiator in the marketplace. So to Michelle's point, as long as you're not encroaching above a 2 or 3% increase in level, but you have the right badging on your product, it does differentiate you in terms of your competitive set. Yeah, things like the recycling logos on your package seem to help a lot in terms of helping consumers understand how it is to recycle. Recycling has become almost too complicated in some areas. You got to take the bags to the stores, you got to separate your different packaging components. So at ASR, we're looking at how it is that we can even simplify that further and make that easier for our customers and our consumers. Additionally, since we feed a lot of the CPG companies, being an ingredient supplier, we feed into their sustainability programs and offer our ability, specifically because a lot of our materials that we use are either recyclable or reusable or replaceable, one of the two, that we're able to come in and help CPG companies with their overall objectives. So we have active programs going on at ASR that look at sustainability, look at our products, look at how we can improve over time. But from a consumer standpoint, it seems to be the badging, just really educating them on how to recycle.
All right, thanks for that point, Rich.
Let me interject too, Rich. It's probably worth mentioning that your organization is involved on the front end with using waste material to produce paper goods or maybe even plastic goods, something that's probably not well known about, a large sweetener company. Do you want to just mention that real quick? Because I'll probably get it wrong.
I think what we would say is if you look at our carbon footprint, it's very low because of our farming practices. Then we have Tellus, which uses the cane fiber to create plates and canisters. So we're actually using the benefit of the farming, the benefit of being able to take the carbon footprint down with our plants and extend it on to some of our customers. So like I said, we're what we call fill the fork, and in the fill the fork, we also look at our packaging pieces.
And I just wanted to mention that it was things like that that really impressed Bonumose about ASR.
Thanks, Rich. Thanks, Ed. Just to wrap things up here on this slide, the key takeaways here are that fundamentally we have some really exciting emerging growth brands that are built around the sustainability story. The companies like Beyond Meat, Ripple, Miyoko's Creamery, companies that are also part of the plant-based protein and plant-based food movement that are really aligning themselves with the sustainability message. But further, we're seeing a lot of corporates that are getting involved in the space, groups like Unilever, General Mills, Danone, Nestle. Nestle has made a commitment to reach zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. General Mills has plans to have 1 million acres of farmland under regenerative agricultural principles by 2030, which is interesting because those are two very different types of commitments. And they probably speak a little bit to what those organizations' strengths are, but it also speaks to the broadness of sustainability in the way in which you can make a large commitment. It is different in its own right, but achieves a different type of sustainability principle. So the last two slides I want to cover really quickly here so we can get into some of the conversations with some of our speakers. I just want to provide a little bit of context on thinking through how new food products get developed. And we'd done a deep dive maybe a year ago that was focused on the digitization of food product development. It was really focused on really how challenging it is to build a new successful food product. And so this schematic really outlines how much work goes into building new food products and the considerations that you have to take into account. The process for making a new food product that tastes good, has a good shelf life, has a stable supply chain, is good for you, and is technically feasible and is low cost is really not a super simple process. Some of these key considerations are listed here on the right, and some of these companies that are extremely well resourced may still struggle to bring new products to market that end up being successful and meet the ever complex needs of consumers, where consumers fundamentally don't really want to compromise on flavor, cost, texture, etc., but want all these other added features as well. So with that in mind, there are some core challenges that are really based in sort of this art versus science. Fundamentally, you're building a product, but you're dealing with the human context of it, which is combining food science with these rapidly changing consumer preferences, trying to figure out fundamentally, does this make a good economic case? Does this make a good impact case? But also, do consumers fundamentally like the product, and will it sustain for years to come, given the investment that we need to make into a new product? And so thinking about that, there's a timeline for a new food product to be anywhere from 6 months to 5 years due to the complexities of this current production system. And then even if the product is a success, how long will it be a success for, and what are the variability on returns like that? And so that's why I have this statement here that, like startups, most new products fail. Why? Well, some of these major issues have to do with scalability. They have to do with messaging. They have to do with finding the right customer base, and potentially being on the challenges of consumer education. And I know our guests from Hershey and ASR will be able to speak to this a little bit, but most of the CPGs don't really want to be a first mover on some of these new trends, because it can be challenging to be a first mover and have to hold the burden of new consumer education. And so I just want to point out here that with all these trends in mind, putting in the context of new food product development, it's a challenging business to try and hit a home run here. So moving on to the sort of speaker segment here, I have a slide here on the Bonumose, Hershey, and ASR partnership that was launched recently. And it's a really exciting opportunity when you think about how much work has gone into bringing a partnership like this together, and how challenging that can be, and how much opportunity there is to bring newer, healthier sweeteners and sugars into the market. First of all, Ed or any others on the panel, I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about this partnership, how it came together, and really what its significance is.
Oh, hey, Ed, I think you're on mute. Sorry.
Sorry, I was trying to defer to either you or my good friends from ASR. So I guess I'll start off by saying we did get to know ASR well before we had an investment discussion, and grew to a level of trust with them, and we worked with them in many, many different ways. So a wonderful partner that then has led to an investment relationship. And of course, ASR has a long relationship with Hershey's, who we had met also. So I'm delighted that we have this partnership. I'll kind of defer to Rich and Adam to discuss how the deal came together.
So Adam, let me take the first crack at it. To echo Ed's comments, we've been working at this for 3 years. And what's really nice about Bonumose and Ed's team is they were creating a better mousetrap for creating tagatose. So tagatose is a known entity in the food industry. It's actually used in specifically dairy and some other products. So we didn't have to be first movers in terms of educating a lot of the customers and consumers of what tagatose was about. But what Bonumose brought was a very creative and innovative way of making tagatose. What I really love about the partnership was, just starting out, building that relationship, understanding each other's company's needs and wants, and how to work that together, culminated in the ability for ASR, through our Boca Raton Innovation Center, to build the pilot facility to actually demonstrate the next level of the new technology that Ed Rogers and his team had created. The reason why I bring that up is it shows that to have a successful partnership, specifically with startups, you look at where the different technologies blend together. There's a lot of technologies associated with what Ed does that the sugar industry does. So we have expertise there. Jim Kappas will talk about our reach into customers and the customer base and how that works and what ASR can bring to that. But even more importantly, looking at Adam and the Hershey relationship, the fact that we had a strong relationship with Hershey already to reach out to them very early on in the process, share with them under confidentiality, hey, this is where we're headed. We are a sweetener company. We think this technology has a lot of opportunity to grow. And we'd like to work with a CPG company such as yourself to take that forward and to make that work for ourselves. And, Adam and his crew stepped in, lots of conversation that then led to a joint investment in a Bonumose, probably about 2 years. So my key point here is 3 years into making the relationship, 2 years in terms of working with Hershey of getting into an investment before we got there with a product that is known in the marketplace. All of it worked due to trust with the different partners, due to the quality of those partners, and the ability to communicate and freely share among those different partners.
Absolutely, Rich. And just to echo what you said, I mean, ASR is one of Hershey's most core strategic partners. And so I think that, the partnership with ASR and Hershey is a powerful, partnership together. And with the environment as dynamic and rapidly changing as it is, and I've been, in this industry for about 10 years, but have covered many different industries. I think that what's been going on over the past 5 years, you've seen the pace of change just incrementally kind of accelerate. And obviously there's a number of different, consumer or channel reasons for that. But I think that Hershey, it took us time. We're a big company. We're used to doing things a certain way, and we've been very successful at it. I think that our head of R&D, who is also a critical part of this partnership, said to me 2 years ago that the democratization of sugar is basically one of the top 5 things that he's seen in his career, and he's spanned P&G and a number of organizations at a very, very senior level. So that kind of got me to straighten up in my chair, and we really got under this opportunity. And we think that the partnership is compelling, the technology is compelling, and that all led up to a very exciting announcement in February. So I'll pass it on to the rest of the panel to comment from here.
If I may follow up on that, like Rich said, tagatose is not new. Bonumose did not invent tagatose. And by the way, Ed Rogers invented nothing here. Dr. Dan Wichelecki and our science team, thank God we've got them. And what they were able to do was to link together enzymes in a way, food grade enzymes in a way that can tip the scales and produce extremely high yields of tagatose, 4 to 6 times higher than any other processes out there, nearly 100% conversion of starch. And so it becomes a cost disruptive technology. That's what we've done. Is we haven't invented tagatose, but we've invented a way that can produce it so it can be affordable for mass market adoption, we think.
Thanks, Ed. Well, and thanks to Rich and Adam for your perspectives on sort of the intro to this partnership as well. And I think, Ed, you raise a good point on sort of the constraint that Bonumose solves in this equation for companies like an ASR or a Hershey in terms of moving into these types of alternative sugars, alternative sweeteners that have some really desirable characteristics, but have previously just not been accessible from a cost or a supply standpoint. So one thing I'd be curious to hear from our speakers from either the Hershey team or from ASR is when there are new trends coming online. So let's take, for example, consumers wanting to control their sugar intake or consumers wanting a better sustainability profile around their food products. How do companies like a Hershey or an ASR fundamentally think about when they should start responding to these types of shifts? How do you evaluate it for being a passing fad versus a long-term trend and something that needs to change at an organizational level? And then fundamentally, how you make decisions about, do we make new products? Do we change products that we already have? Or do we acquire new businesses that have a core competency in this new area? How do you go about making decisions like that?
So I'll start off. I mean, we've seen a number of different kind of passing fads. I think that we look at it from a consumer's perspective. Obviously, Hershey is a marketing company. I think that consumer adoption, obviously there's going to be first movers, but there's a series of validation points that I like to see around a certain trend. And for the sugar reduction, there's been many validation points around consumers wanting to reduce sugar. And when you talk to consumers and you listen to what they want to do with their choices around diet, sugar reduction along with plant-based and some of the other just always are at the top of the list. So I think that we've looked at, I don't want to pick on it, but we looked at CBD for a while now, and we didn't see that being a space where we wanted to be a quick first mover. We would much rather kind of wait, and we were happy to be a fast follower on that space. But I think that in this particular opportunity, we felt that there was certain benefits in having a leadership position in both with our vendors, with our customers, and as a category, going out to our consumers and talking to our retail partners as well.
I'll jump in just to build on Adam's comments and maybe go back to something Michelle said. In my experience, there's really three criteria, and I'll group taste and texture into the first criteria: health or label claim, and then affordability or price. And in this case, I think I've been a part of many projects, maybe over a dozen in this type of space, that, to be candid, 3/4 of which did not meet expectation for one reason or another. But in my view, there are existing choices to reduce or eliminate sugar from products, but most of them, in my opinion, fail on taste. Some fail on price or affordability. The health claim, be it reduced sugar, added fiber, sugar-free, reduces cholesterol, whatever it might be, is what opens the door and creates interest in the consumer's mind. But taste and affordability are what turn a niche product into a successful one. And it's one last thing on affordability. And this sort of goes across maybe 20 years of doing this in different global markets, but early on, Japan and the Asian markets were the first to price to value for things like added fiber or other health claims. Europe has been, I'd say, somewhere in the middle. And in my opinion, the North American market has been the slowest to move away from line pricing. And the glaring example that I would use is that sugar-free diet beverages were successful because the beverage companies actually saved money by using high-potency sweeteners. The more challenging food applications tend to be the lower moisture and more indulgent food categories. And in this case, tagatose helps answer the taste criteria in a strong way. It's the most sugar-like of all the replacements. But dare I say, and I'm responsible for the commercialization, but I think on the affordability side, there still needs to be some creativity by the CPG companies around pack size, around price to value, and really in sense to lead the consumer to pay for that, because without that, you do limit the use of novel technologies. There is always there's no free lunch in that regard. And I guess I'll just say it in that way, that I think we do have a much more affordable technology, but it is not going to be at the North American or global prices for sugar. It's at least not in the early generation of these rare sugar products.
Give us time, Jim, give us time. But hey, I want to follow up on the things that Adam and Jim and Michelle said earlier about taste. The importance of taste and texture was driven home to me at an early age. We used to love to make chocolate chip cookies when I was young. And then my parents got on a health food kick. And so they would put wheat bran in everything. And they made chocolate chip cookies with wheat bran, which is not one of the recommended ingredients. And then also honey in substitute for sugar. And let me tell you, that's not going to be a fast-moving consumer good anytime. Now, in contrast, for the very first board meeting, which after the investment that we held virtually, of course, instead of toasting champagne, I toasted chocolate chip cookies made with Domino brown sugar, Tagatose in substitute for white sugar, and Hershey's chocolate chips. And unfortunately, I couldn't share them with the other members of the board, but the taste was and texture was there.
Thanks for that anecdote. No, it's great to see the collaboration truly come to life. One question I do have for our partners from Hershey and ASR is the alternative sweetener, alternative sugar space is a complex story. And I'll point out, for example, that Hershey actually already has a line of sugar-free products that I believe are formulated with sugar alcohols. And so there's a number of different options out there. You've got sugar alcohols, you've got stevia, you've got monk fruit, a few other options that are also available in the market today. How have you thought through the messaging behind some of these alternative sweeteners and which ones to move forward with and which ones to sort of steer clear from? Because there's some that are positive for consumers, and sometimes others that have gotten a bad name, like aspartame. And in fact, on the Hershey sugar-free products, they specifically say not made with aspartame. So just curious to know how the evaluation has gone for some of these alternatives that are out there and how you weigh performance with consumer perception that may change in terms of how consumers think about alternatives.
So I don't have a solid answer for you, David, but I think that we are going about it very slowly and thoughtfully. Every category in food and beverage over the last 5 years has gone through a better for you evolution, and we've seen that. And Jim mentioned the carbonated beverage. Obviously, they've gone through their better for you evolution many decades ago. For Hershey, it's a little bit different than, say, Heinz ketchup. You put simply or organic on a Heinz bottle, and the consumer has a really easy choice to make. In our category, consumers enter it. They know what they're getting into. When you turn over a Reese's cup, it's going to have 23 grams of sugar. I think that the experience and the taste and texture is kind of the complete package that they're comfortable kind of taking on that kind of amount of sugar. So I think that we are launching organic products with our big brands. Obviously, we've used other sweeteners in our sweets brands like Icebreakers, but I think it's going to be a test and learn. It's going to be a slow rollout, just because we are mindful that consumers kind of view the confectionery chocolate category in a certain way. And we want to be very thoughtful that we are not confusing anyone and that we kind of are offering up an alternative if a consumer, decides to go in that direction. So I think that, it's not the best answer, but that's kind of how we're approaching it at this stage from a testing perspective.
Hey, it's Michelle, David. The only thing that I will add is, given my time in Hershey, I was there in 1997 when they launched Sweet Escapes, which was in response to a consumer drive toward less fat. And in big yellow letters, it said less fat. And as a salesperson, we talked about how the product was formulated to have less fat, but taste great. And, as with anything, that product lifestyle went along. I was also there for the launch of the sugar-free line, which, as you mentioned, uses sugar alcohols. And there's a couple different sugar alcohols, maltitol and some others, that have adverse effects on the human system if you eat a lot of it. So we chose the better one, but we still cautioned on the label that moderate consumption is the best. The point is, I think Hershey has always been in touch with what the consumer's been doing and what they want, and collaborating with the retailers, plus using their science. I think what's new and really exciting is the collaboration and investment in technology from somebody like Bonumose. I think, Adam, to you and your team's credit, that's kind of a new investment strategy to collaborate. And I think it's great. I think it's important for brands to do that. David, one of your earlier slides talked about the growth of private label. And as a retailer and a CPG person, I'm a fan of both, but I believe in the role of brands to lead with technology, development, outstanding marketing, consumer insights. But I also believe they have to lead with collaboration. And that's what we've been talking about here, because if you do that, you'll get some affordability. And if not, I think the private brands will win on affordability. So I think this collaboration here between these three companies, and it's not just collaboration, it's investment. So I think that's a point of difference. And I think this gives me a lot of faith and hope in large CPG, that instead of, kind of wondering what's going on with new technology and entrepreneurs and, the new science and developments, that they're working together to invest, support, and collaborate.
Well, Michelle, that is a really excellent point. And it actually is an excellent point of transition as well, because I'd love to ask you some more questions, more specifically, because you have a really unique integrated perspective across all of these players. Before we jump to this next portion here with Michelle, I want to just pause for a moment and see if our friends, partners at ASR, Hershey, or Bonumose have any thoughts they want to leave us with.
Well, David, I can't help myself. I wanted to mention something about plant-based foods. So traditionally, Tagados has been made from dairy, and Bonumose instead makes it from plant-based feedstock starch. But in addition to that, we're relevant to plant-based foods because when you make, for example, pea protein, there's a lot of starch left over. Chickpea protein, same thing, a lot of starch left over. Any plant-based protein, you're going to have a lot of starch left over. And Bonumose is able to upcycle that starch and utilize it in our process and convert it to these super high yields of rare sugars. So we have some indirect touch points there to the plant-based meat, plant-based dairy movement.
No, that's great. And it also adds sort of the, circular economy sort of perspective and means by which we can reduce waste in the food system fundamentally, while hitting, like, how can we get people to eat more plants, and how can we get people to reduce sugar intake, are both high impact socially and environmentally. So yeah.
Right. And we have some other things we're doing in that area, but I'll, yield my time.
Thanks, Ed. Well, Michelle, I know we've heard from you a little bit here. I just wanted to sort of highlight a little bit of the unique perspective that you bring to the table as somebody who's worked really in depth with across CPG, retail, and even ag R&D, and then actually some of the really interesting work that you've done with blended. And so, sort of given some of the topics and trends that we've covered so far, are there any trends or movements that you're really excited about and think are here to stay, and think that CPGs and retail should be paying the most attention to?
Yeah, I think the health and nutrition is a trend that everybody can understand. And there's a lot of reasons for that. David, you did a great job in the beginning kind of outlining them, whether it's personalization, meaning fitness trackers, apps. I saw Noom was mentioned on there. I'm actually doing that. I'm learning every day.
Oh, nice.
But I never thought, Weight Watchers or WW, things have been around for a long time, but I think technology has brought them to us in a new and different and exciting and acceptable way. It could be wearables, apps, exercise, but I think the trend that is here to stay is health, nutrition, and the fact that I'm responsible for that, meaning I, the individual. Nobody else is doing that. And whether it's, keto, Whole30, all of the other types of ways to eat, the retail and the store has a huge part in that, because if you're shopping for one of those programs, processed foods and kind of the intersection of the store or the inner aisles of the store are just not where it's at. And that's where CPG has grown up and kind of made their existence. So I think this transition to include retail and CPG is important, but it's driven by the consumer. One of your slides mentioned millennials. I'm learning better habits from my kids, and they have no tolerance for processed foods, and they try harder and they make it a bigger part of their life. So for the generation that is clearly leading big companies making decisions, we have to understand the consumer trends, collaborate, invest, and bring it together, or we won't get the privilege of staying in business. And you can see the QSRs and the fast food and things trying to pivot and make a difference. And I think this health and wellness, and importantly, the correlation to our healthcare costs is something that is foundational. And I know at iSelect, you guys put a lot of investment behind all three of those pillars: health, wellness, nutrition, as well as healthcare. I'll mention Blended just because you have it up on the slide there. Blended is a robotic smoothie maker that is totally customizable. So you order on your app, you put in, they have some predefined recipes, but if you want, more vitamin C, if you want an energy boost, if you want more spinach, whatever you want, you can kind of dial up your mix. It sends it to the robot. It makes it for you. So you have precision, you have consistency, you have error-free, and now, importantly, you have contactless. So you order it, you pick it up, and it's just pushed right out the little door there. And it's pretty fascinating because it's an example of a healthy, on-the-go, contactless, personalized meal.
Yeah. Well, I want to make a comment there, because when I was thinking about, as I was putting this presentation together, about these various trends that are coming together, and having spoken with Blended when you made the introduction for us, and it really is at the center of a lot of things that are not only food and consumer shifts, but like technology shifts. So it's this really interesting overlay of the way in which, Jamba Juice, kind of the early foray into like smoothies that have lots of different components, and like you can pick a lot of different things, but it's basically mobile native. It's pretty intense robotics. This is not a simple piece of equipment, but their performance has been really incredible, and the level of personalization, convenience, and even the alignment with contactless via COVID is just such a unique combination of all of those things at once. I think they actually are in some sort of retail location in the East Bay in their early pre-commercial launch. I've been meaning to go over there and check them out.
Yes, they are in Walmart, and then they have a partnership with, as you mentioned, Jamba Juice. So
The one other question, Michelle, that I'm just curious. So given your work with both Walmart and BJ's as two major retailers, do large retailers like that think about these types of shifts in the same way? So we talked about how many different types of things there are that are happening, whether or not it's the way in which consumers find information about their food, or whether it's these specific food trends, et cetera. Have you found in your experience that these large companies typically are responding similarly to these types of changes, or is it really like different depending on which organization you're working with, and their responses could be totally different?
I think both organizations, Walmart and BJ's, respond to consumer demand and trends. With BJ's, you have a membership group, so there's a very clear connection and opportunity for communication with your members. Walmart is one of the best customer-focused organizations I've ever worked with or worked for. And I think it's a maniacal focus on what the customers want. And that can be accomplished in many different ways. It can be taking a chance on small suppliers and maybe just starting small in one distribution center. It can be working with large multinational suppliers and collaborating on product design and creation. So I think it takes all of that to keep up with our customer. When you think about the speed with which technology works, translate that into food. And because of all of those things in the pipeline that are hurdles and obstacles that you laid out earlier, it's important, I think Richard mentioned trust and collaboration. I think those are how we move forward to keep up with the consumer. Those that don't keep up with the consumer, as I said, will not have the privilege of serving the consumer.
Very fair and valid point. Well, Michelle, thank you so much for your additional comments here on top of all the insights you provided throughout the presentation today. I do want to give an opportunity if there are any questions from the audience for any of our speakers and panelists today. We do have sort of a thesis slide that I'll also cover once we're through this. We may run a little bit over time. Just want to give a chance for any questions from the audience. For Ed, Adam, Jim, Rich, or Michelle, I am happy to cover off on any of those questions as they arise. So I'll pause here for a moment to see if there are any. And just by the way, the best way to type your question is using the Q&A box, and I can answer them in the order that they're received. Well, if there are none, or if people need a few moments to warm up here, I'm just going to go ahead and cover off on some of these key takeaways, some areas of opportunity, and some of the remaining questions I identified. And if anybody on the panel has any thoughts they'd like to add, please let me know. Two of the key takeaways that I had here from doing the research here is I still think the messaging around some of these consumer areas of impact, whether it's environmental sustainability, improved nutrition, plant-based proteins, it's still a pretty confusing area. When you think about going into the store, making a buying decision about truly what's going to be best for you, I think about the example of sugar-free products and the way in which consumers may perceive sugar one way, they may perceive alternative sweeteners another way, and getting that messaging right so you still have the same performance, but you're still hitting what consumers want while there's still an emerging understanding of the nutritional impacts of these products is challenging. And I'll add on this unsustainability side, there's not a lot of products in the store that you can buy where it's super easy to understand truly what the environmental sustainability impact is of that product and really what type of impact you're buying with your buying decision. I thought Ripple Foods does do a really interesting job on their website where you can really see it changing in real time. I think it's a really impactful way of showing the data to consumers that really care a lot. But within that, I still think the health, environment, and personalization pieces are aspects that are going to continue to grow and continue to be central to the ways in which CPGs, new CPGs or existing players are going to continue to develop products in these categories. If there's one area of opportunity that I'm really excited about, it's this food is health message. And I know something that's core to what we talk about and think about here at iSelect, but the true science of food is health will continue to evolve. Consumers and product companies will both continue to learn about what matters at both a macro scale, what's better for everyone, as well as a micro scale, what's better for me. And I think those are things that are going to continue to develop both with the advancement of science, but also as people begin to experiment with products and build sort of reputations behind specific products that may have unique nutritional impacts. And then finally, some of the remaining questions that I would have in terms of thinking in the future are, will consumers' willingness to pay a premium for sustainability change as we think about the advent of climate change and awareness around that problem and the way that the food system is intimately tied into that issue? Will people become more willing to pay for products that have a verifiable sustainability impact, particularly as it pertains to climate? I'd be interested to see if that changes. I'd also be additionally interested to see how large companies will be held accountable for impact, sustainability, or health goals that they set. There's been some very lofty goals set at both the corporate government level on how companies are going to improve their environmental impact or improve the health and nutritional quality of their products. And I think whether or not those end up coming to fruition, it'll be interesting to see who and how those companies are held accountable. And then finally, one specific area that I'm really interested to see is how are plant-based foods going to change as they become more mainstream? I really think about it being comparable to the organic movement. And if you read about sort of the origins of the organic movement and how that has changed as fundamentally that label has scaled, the definitions of organic and what it means really has changed a lot. And I think as we think about partnerships like the Beyond Meat and PepsiCo partnership, I wonder what plant-based will look like in 5 years, or to what plant-based might have looked like for vegans and vegetarians 5 or 10 years ago. And so I think that world's going to change a lot, and what plant-based is going to mean may change for better or for worse, depending on what your perspective is. Addressing to see if we have any final other questions. I think we're...
Debbie, while you're looking at that, I think the other question on your remaining questions is how are companies going to handle the paradigm shift associated with healthy goals and sustainability? Many companies' infrastructures are not built to handle them. And one thing that Tagatose does is the bulking agent issue that you have with other, even natural high potency sweeteners that you can't handle it in your current production facilities. Same thing with sustainability changes. You make one change in your packaging and it goes all the way through to your robotics that are loading up your trucks. That's very large dollar numbers associated with that. So companies that can solve for their customers will win in this paradigm shift change.
Thanks, Rich. I guess with that, any final thoughts, comments? Rich, thank you for your thoughtful comments there. If Ed, Adam, Jim, or Michelle have any final thoughts you'd like to leave us with before we wrap things up, now would be a great time.
I mean, the last thing I would say is, this is all going to be a journey for all of us. I think that what we've been doing, what these companies have been doing, like Hershey for 100 years, the game is changing rapidly. And I think that Michelle made several great points around that and what she sees. But it's going to be, I think that you're not going to be able to flip a switch overnight. And we want to be as thoughtful as we can be as we kind of pivot the business to where consumers are going. And it's just going to take a lot longer than people expect, I think.
Very good point, Adam. Great. I'd really like to thank Ed Rogers, Adam Kane, Jim Kappas, Richard Dyer, and Michelle Gleckler for your time today and your really interesting and thoughtful, helpful insights on a really exciting time in the world of food, and a really exciting time to be a consumer because there's more options than I've ever been able to choose from before. Thank you as well to our audience for your active participation today in general. For anybody who is new to this webinar today, we host these deep dives once a month. Typically on the second or third Wednesday of the month, we alternate themes from a food and agriculture theme to a healthcare focused theme on a monthly basis. This recording will be available for replay on YouTube, so please feel free to share it with anybody who might be interested. If you'd like a copy of the presentation, I am happy to send a presentation to anybody who would be interested in one. Otherwise, thanks everyone for your time today. Have a great rest of your Wednesday.
David, bye.
Thanks, everybody.